Sign it before dessert, or I promise you my son will have his marriage annulled by Monday morning." My mother-in-law's voice was quiet. That was the thing about Margaret Holloway. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She had spent 40 years perfecting the kind of calm that made you feel the floor shifting beneath you, the kind of calm that reminded you exactly how replaceable you were. I looked at the document sitting next to the cranberry sauce. A postnuptial agreement, 14 pages, drafted by the most expensive family law attorney in Connecticut, designed to strip me of every marital asset if my husband and I ever divorced. It had been printed on heavy cream stock, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than most people's lunch. Someone had placed a pen beside it like silverware, like it was part of the place setting. My husband, Daniel, sat directly across from me. He was studying his wine glass with the focused attention of a man who had decided the safest thing he could do tonight was become invisible. He wouldn't look at me. He hadn't looked at me since we pulled through the iron gates of his parents' estate 2 hours ago. His father, Howard, sat at the head of the table, cutting his turkey with the slow, precise movements of someone who had already won. His sister, Victoria, was doing that thing she always did, performing a kind of theatrical indifference, examining her manicure while her husband, Preston, quietly refilled his glass and watched me the way you watch a car accident before it happens. This was Thanksgiving at the Holloways. This was what I had married into 3 years ago, when I was 28 years old and naive enough to believe that love was an effective armor. Before I tell you what I put on that table instead of my signature, and why, 20 minutes later, 2 black SUVs were blocking the driveway, tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments, because this is a story about what happens when the people who underestimated you the most end up sitting across from the thing they never saw coming. Have you ever had to sit at a table full of people who smiled at you while planning your destruction? If you have, stay with me, because tonight we're not just eating turkey. Margaret folded her hands on the tablecloth and looked at me with a particular expression she reserved for things that disappointed her. Contractors who missed deadlines, caterers who misunderstood portion sizes, and me. "Claire," she said, making my name sound like a minor inconvenience. "You're a smart girl. I've always said that about you. You're smart enough to understand what this family represents. The Holloway name opens doors that most people spend entire lifetimes standing outside of. What we're asking isn't unreasonable. It's simply a formality." "A formality?" I repeated. "Daniel's grandfather built this family from nothing," Howard said, setting down his fork. "We protect what was built. That's not personal." "It feels a little personal," I said. Victoria looked up from her nails. She smiled at me, the specific smile she had been perfecting since the day Daniel introduced us. The one that said she found me amusing, the way you find a child's drawing amusing, with affectionate condescension. "No one is attacking you, Claire. We just think that given your background, it's reasonable to have certain protections in place. You came into this family with nothing. We'd simply like clarity on what leaves with you if things don't work out." Your background. Those 2 words have been following me around this house for 3 years. Your background, meaning the small apartment in Akron where I grew up. Your background, meaning the fact that my mother worked double shifts at a grocery store and my father had been gone since I was 4. Your background, meaning that I had not been born into a family with a name that opened doors, so clearly I must have married one to get through them. They had never asked what I did. Not really. Not with genuine curiosity. Daniel had told them early on that I ran a small software company, and Margaret had nodded the way you nod when someone tells you they've taken up watercolor painting. Polite, dismissive. The topic never came up again. To the Holloways, I was a pretty girl from nowhere who had charmed their son into a wedding and was now statistically likely to take half his trust fund if the marriage dissolved. They weren't entirely wrong about being strategic. They were just wrong about which one of us was playing chess. "I'm not signing it," I said. The table went still. Daniel finally looked up at me. His expression was complicated, part guilt, part warning, part something I recognized as the look of a man who knows he has made a series of bad decisions and is now watching them compound in real time. "Claire," he started. "I'm not signing it," I said again calmly. The same calm Margaret used. I had been practicing it. Howard leaned back in his chair. "Then I want you to understand what that means. I have a call scheduled with our attorney at 9 tomorrow morning. We begin the annulment process on grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation. You represented yourself to our family as a woman of modest means who loved our son. If it turns out there were material misrepresentations about your circumstances or intentions, the marriage can be unwound. Fraudulent misrepresentation, I said. That's an interesting choice of words. Preston cleared his throat. He was the enforcer, the one they used when they wanted to deliver bad news in the language of reasonableness. He had gone to Yale Law, which he mentioned the way other people mention their eye color, as context, as basic fact. Claire, we've done our due diligence. We know your company's last filed revenue. $48,000 last year. He paused. We're not here to humiliate you. We're here to protect the family. I looked at Preston for a long moment. He had gone to Yale Law. I knew that. I also knew that he had been using Holloway family money to fund a private investment account he hadn't disclosed to Victoria, that the account held a significant position in a pharmaceutical company currently under SEC investigation, and that he had received the tip from a contact at their accounting firm which was now, as of 31 days ago, a subsidiary of a company I owned. But I didn't say any of that yet. 48,000, I said. That's what the filing showed, Preston said, with the satisfaction of a man holding a full house. Pull out your phones, I said, and search Wheeler Systems. Nobody moved. Please, I said, and the word was so precise, so controlled, that Victoria actually reached for her phone before catching herself. Claire, we're not going to, Margaret started. Wheeler Systems, I said again. VLAR. It's fine. I'll wait. Daniel's face had changed. He was looking at me the way he used to look at me in the beginning, before the Holloways had slowly, patiently worked on him like a current wearing down a stone, with wonder, like he had just remembered something about me that the last 3 years had caused him to forget. He picked up his phone. He typed. I watched him read. I watched the color leave his face. What is... He started, and then stopped. Howard frowned at his son, then picked up his own phone. Margaret looked at her husband with the expression of a woman who has never needed to look anything up in her life, and resented the implication that she should start now. Victoria typed something, and went very still. Preston's jaw tightened. Wheeler Systems was not the name on my business cards. It was not the name I used in public. It was the parent company, the entity sitting above the entities, sitting above the entities that touched the things people could actually see. I had structured it that way deliberately, not to hide, but because when you build something real, you don't need it to be legible to people who aren't looking. The last public valuation of Wheeler Systems, reported in a piece in the Wall Street Journal 14 months ago, was $2.1 billion. The Holloways' total family net worth, including the estate we were sitting in and all of Howard's commercial real estate holdings, was approximately $400 million. I knew this because I had read their financial disclosure during the due diligence process before I allowed one of my subsidiaries to extend them a line of commercial credit 2 years ago. They didn't know the credit had come from me. They knew the name of the bank. They didn't know who owned it. This isn't, Howard started. Possible, I offered. You've been running this company since before you married Daniel? Margaret asked. Her voice had not changed. I respected that about her even now. She was a woman who did not allow herself the luxury of visible shock. I founded Wheeler when I was 24, I said. The $48,000 on the filing Preston mentioned belongs to a shell entity I used for administrative purposes. It has nothing to do with the operating company. I picked up the postnuptial agreement and held it for a moment. I understand why you had this drawn up. You thought you were protecting your family. You thought I was someone who had something to gain and nothing to offer. You thought the math was simple. How? Daniel said. It wasn't quite a question. It was the sound of a person's model of reality cracking. I didn't lie to you, I said, and I meant it. I had told Daniel I had a company. I had told him it was growing. I had told him on our third date, sitting on the floor of my apartment eating takeout because I hadn't yet bought a couch, that I was going to build something that lasted. He had laughed gently, not cruelly, and said that was very ambitious of me. He had not asked follow-up questions. Neither had his family. That was the thing about the Holloways. They looked at me and saw a category, and categories don't require investigation. So this is what? Victoria started. You've been hiding this to what? Make us look foolish. To prove some kind of point. I haven't been hiding anything, I said. You never asked. There was a silence that sat over the table like weather. And then my mind went somewhere else, the way it does when the walls of a room start to feel familiar for the wrong reasons. I went back 3 years to a dinner almost exactly like this one, 2 weeks after Daniel and I got engaged. A welcome dinner, Margaret had called it. I had worn a dress I couldn't really afford because I wanted to make a good impression before I understood that the impression had already been made and adjudicated before I walked through the door. After dinner, while Daniel was in the other room with his father, Margaret had pulled me aside into the room she called the library. She had sat across from me in a wingback chair and said in that same quiet voice, "I want to be honest with you because I think honesty is a form of respect. Daniel is generous. He always has been. He loves easily and he trusts easily, and those are beautiful qualities in a person, and they are also vulnerabilities. I need you to understand that this family will always protect itself. Whatever your intentions are, and I'll take you at your word that they're sincere, I need you to know that we are watching." I had left that room and sat in the car for 10 minutes before going back inside. I had thought about my mother, who had never once in my entire life said anything like that to any person I brought home, who had offered coffee and asked questions and been grateful for whoever made me smile. I had thought about the 7 employees I had at the time who trusted me to make payroll, who didn't know yet that what we were building was something they would still be talking about in 20 years. I had thought about the girl I had been at 21, sitting in a computer lab at 3 o'clock in the morning running the same simulation for the 14th time, absolutely certain she was onto something, and absolutely terrified she was wrong. I had thought, they will not break this. Not this. Whatever else they take from me, they cannot have this. I came back to the table now, to the silence, to Margaret's face, which had finally shifted, not to shock or shame, but to a recalculation, the expression of someone updating a spreadsheet. "Well," she said. "There's something else," I said. "And here's where I need to be honest with you. Because looking back, I can see that what I did next was not entirely clean. It was not the behavior of someone who had simply risen above it. It was the behavior of someone who had been carefully, deliberately patient for 3 years and had finally decided that patience had reached its expiration date. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. I set it on the table next to the postnuptial agreement. 18 months ago," I said, "your family took out a commercial credit line of $12 million to refinance 3 of the Holloway Group properties. The lending institution was Meridian Capital Partners." I looked at Howard. "In November of last year, I acquired a controlling interest in Meridian Capital, which means as of that acquisition, I hold the note on your credit line." I opened the folder and slid a single document across the table. "The line is in technical default as of 30 days ago. The balloon payment due in December was missed. Not by much, but missed." Howard stood up. "Sit down, Howard," I said. And the surprise of hearing it said that way, quiet, final, made him hesitate long enough that he actually sat back down. "You can't." "I'm not calling it," I said. "I want to be very clear about that. I have no interest in destabilizing the Holloway properties. I have no interest in your business. What I have is documentation, and what I want is for everyone at this table to understand what the actual math looks like." I looked at Preston. Since we're doing due diligence, Preston was very still. "The account you've been running through Trident Advisory," I said, turning to face him directly, "received material non-public information about Pelios Pharma's FDA filing timeline. The source of that information was a contact at Strickland Financial. Strickland was acquired by a Wheeler subsidiary in September. Their internal communications are now subject to our compliance review." I let that sit. I forwarded the relevant files to the SEC's whistleblower division 6 days ago. Victoria turned to look at her husband. Preston opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "I want to be clear," I said to the table. "I did not do any of this tonight. I did not engineer this dinner. I did not arrange for any of this to coincide. You called me here. You put that document next to the cranberry sauce. You chose tonight." I closed the folder. I just came prepared. Margaret looked at me for a long time. Her face was doing something I had never seen it do before, working. Visibly working. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "I want my husband to look at me," I said. Daniel looked up. "I want you to understand," I said to him, "that I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because for 3 years I have sat in this house and let your family define what I was worth to them. And I kept my mouth shut because I thought if I just waited, if I was just patient enough, it would become clear on its own. I thought you would see it. I thought they would. I looked at him steadily. That document they put in front of me tonight, did you know about it? He looked down. Did you know about it? They told me it was a formality, he said quietly. They said it was just to protect the family. I finished. Yes, I heard. Claire, I didn't think. No, I said. You didn't. There was a sound in the driveway, tires on gravel, then the heavy metallic sound of vehicle doors. Margaret turned toward the window. Howard pushed back his chair. 2 sets of headlights were moving up the private road. That would be the federal compliance team, I said. They're not here for dinner. I authorized a voluntary disclosure with the SEC 2 weeks ago regarding Trident. They asked me to be present for the initial interview with the relevant parties. I looked at Preston. That's you. This is insane, Victoria said. Her voice was high and tight. You can't do this in someone's home. Preston can speak with them here, or he can come involuntarily to their office on Monday, I said. That was the agreement. I advocated for the home option because I thought it would be less disruptive. You're welcome. Preston was staring at the folder like it might move. I want to say something, I said, standing up. And I want to say it clearly because I think it's the most important thing that happens at this table tonight. I looked at Margaret. I don't hate you. I'm not doing this out of hatred. I'm doing this because you handed me a 14-page document and a pen and told me to sign away my rights because you had already decided what I was. And I sat here and I let you finish your turkey, and I let you say every word you planned to say because I think if you were going to do it, you should have the chance to do it all the way, and I should have the chance to respond all the way. You've made your point, Howard said tightly. I've made a start, I said. The point is this. I never hid from you. You never looked. There's a difference. And the next time you sit across from someone and decide in advance what they are, I'd encourage you to ask one more question before you print 14 pages on heavy cream paper. I picked up my bag. I looked at Daniel one more time. I'll be at the Whitmore Hotel if you want to talk, I said. Genuinely talk. Not Holloway talk. Actual conversation. I buttoned my coat. I'm still your wife. I'd like the chance to figure out if that means something to us independent of all of this. But that's your decision. I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard the sound of the front doorbell. Heard Howard stand. Heard Margaret say something in a low, controlled voice that I didn't try to make out. Heard Victoria say Preston's name once, sharply, like a question that already knew its answer. I didn't stop walking. Outside, the November air was clean and cold, the kind of cold that wakes you up rather than punishing you. The gravel was loud under my heels. I passed the first black SUV. A man in a dark coat gave me a brief nod. I nodded back. My car was at the end of the circular driveway. I had parked it there deliberately, facing out. When I got in and started the engine, I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, watching the lights of the estate in the rearview mirror. The windows were bright and gold in the dark. The house enormous and certain of itself, the way houses are when they've been in one family for generations. She arrived at 6 o'clock exactly. I was already at the kitchen table. No coffee, no pretense of hospitality, just the table between us and the folder Raymond had given me sitting to one side. Jolene sat across from me and opened with offense, which didn't surprise me. She said I was overreacting, that I'd made a decision without giving her a chance to explain, that a marriage wasn't something you threw away without a conversation. I let her finish. Then I opened the folder and laid 3 photographs on the table. The motel, room 114. Her walking to the door at 11:08 a.m. She looked at them without speaking. Kyle Mercer, I said. 34 years old. Fitcore on Middlebrook. 93 days of phone contact before I took those photographs. Her jaw tightened. She looked up at me. You followed me. I did, I said. After your 6-year-old son told me that Kyle said you had pretty eyes. That landed. I saw it in the way her expression shifted. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition that the thread had started somewhere she hadn't controlled. She tried a different angle. Told me I didn't understand what had been missing in our marriage, that she hadn't intended for things to go this far, that if I just paid more attention, she might not have. I stopped her there. I talked to Gary, I said. Complete silence. He told me about the trainer at the other gym. I continued, keeping my voice level. He told me about the attorney you hired before he knew anything was wrong. He told me what it cost him. I paused. I found a charge from Delaney and Cross on our account, Jolene. 5 months ago. You were in their office planning your exit while I was picking Brody up from school. She said nothing for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped. What do you want? I want you to understand that this isn't something I'm doing in anger, I said. I want you to understand that I know exactly what happened and exactly how it was planned. And I want you to know that the prenuptial agreement you signed has a fidelity clause that Raymond Hall is prepared to argue in front of a judge, with those photographs as exhibits. She looked at the photos on the table. The calculation behind her eyes was visible, running numbers, assessing positions the same way she'd done with Gary, except this time the math wasn't working in her favor. What about Brody? She said. Brody is your son, I answered. I would have liked to stay in his life. You made that complicated. She left 40 minutes later without having agreed to anything, which was fine. That conversation wasn't about agreement. It was about making sure she understood the ground she was standing on before the attorneys took over. I recorded voice memo number 5 after she pulled out of the driveway. Short, factual, no editorializing. At the end, I said, she knows now. The performance is over. Whatever comes next happens in daylight. Raymond called me on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the papers were served, and told me Delaney and Cross had submitted their formal position. Spousal support, a claim on projected business income based on contributions during the marriage, and a request for extended transition time before Jolene was required to vacate the house. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my Farragut shop and listened to him read through the list without interrupting. When he finished, I said, "Walk me through what we counter with." Raymond was methodical, which is exactly what I'd hired him to be. The prenuptial agreement's fidelity clause was the centerpiece, signed, witnessed, filed with the county clerk. Jolene's attorney knew it existed and had already attempted to argue it was signed under duress, which Raymond described as a reach and a half. The photographs from the Ridgeway were time-stamped and clear. The call log covering 93 days of contact with Kyle Mercer was documented, and Gary Strickland had agreed in a signed declaration to provide testimony regarding the pattern of behavior he'd witnessed during his own marriage to Jolene. That last piece was the one that changed the room. Her attorney went quiet for about 4 seconds when Raymond mentioned Strickland's declaration. Raymond told me 4 seconds is a long time in a negotiation. I let myself feel a measure of satisfaction at that. Gary hadn't hesitated when I called to ask. He'd said without drama, "Tell me where to sign." The man had been paying for a situation he couldn't prove for years. This was his chance to put something on the record. The system, as I'd come to understand it through Raymond's explanations, was not built with men like me in mind. At-fault divorce in Tennessee is navigable, but it requires preparation, documentation, and the willingness to stay cold when everything in you wants to react. Most men don't manage all three. They react too early, document too little, or trust the wrong people with information that gets used against them. I'd done none of those things, and it was making a difference. 2 days after Raymond's call, Kyle Mercer called me. I almost didn't pick up. I didn't recognize the number until the second ring. Then I did recognize it from Jolene's call logs, and I answered. His voice was calm but tight, the kind of calm that's manufactured. He said he thought we should talk man to man. He said the situation had gotten complicated, and that he hadn't intended for anyone to get hurt. He said, and this was the part that almost made me lose my composure, that I needed to understand that Jolene had come to him, not the other way around. I let him finish. Then I said, "Kyle, I need you to understand something. This phone call is being recorded. You called me. Everything you just said is on tape, including the admission that you were involved with my wife. I'll be forwarding this to my attorney by end of day." Silence. "Have a good afternoon," I said and ended the call. I pulled the phone away from my face and looked at the screen for a moment. My hands were steady. My pulse was elevated but controlled. I'd been calm through the whole call because I'd known at some level that he'd make contact once things started moving legally. People who believe they're untouchable always want to manage the situation when they realize they're not. I sent the recording to Raymond within the hour. His reply was a single line. "This is useful." "Well done." My phone buzzed. A text from my CFO, Rachel, all clear on the Meridian documentation. Also, the Wall Street Journal wants a comment on the Triton story timeline. I typed back Monday and send flowers to the team. They've had a long quarter. I thought about calling my mother. I would call her tomorrow from somewhere quiet, and she would say something that made the whole thing smaller in the best possible way. She had a gift for that, for making the enormous things manageable without diminishing them. I thought about Daniel. Thought about the first time I saw him at a conference in San Francisco, before I knew who his family was. He had spilled coffee on himself in the hotel lobby and laughed immediately, genuinely, without embarrassment. And I had thought, that's a person who isn't performing. That's someone real. I still believed that was true. I believed it was in there, under the 3 years of Holloway gravity. Whether he could excavate it was not something I could do for him. I put the car in drive. The last thing I saw in my mirror as I pulled through the iron gates was the silhouette of the house against the dark sky, every window lit, and the long, empty driveway behind me. I didn't feel triumphant the way I thought I would. I felt the way you feel at the end of a very long project, the specific exhaustion of having finished something, and the particular lightness that comes after a kind of stillness. That night, I didn't reclaim a seat at their table. I remembered I had never needed one.